I went to school in South Manchester. We lived on a council estate in South Manchester, and it was a pretty normal state school. I can remember the first experience, funnily enough, of starting in the infant school and just thinking this is a kind of a strange place. That, for instance, they were taking the register, you know, and I just thought this is a strange kind of thing to do, because I'd started in the January because of being born in February, so the class was already formed and I came in a bit late. So that was one of my first recollections. Was this is an odd place, you know. It's not what I regard as a sort of congenial place. But I mean, I did okay, you know, and passed the 11 plus, and so I went to a grammar school. But I think my saviour, and I suppose why I could get through the 11 plus, and in fact pass an entrance exam for one of the direct grant schools in Manchester, was that I discovered the library. I didn't really learn a lot in school. I mean, I could count and do basic reading and writing before I went to school. But at home we had just one book, the Bible, as I seem to remember. But it was finding the public library and realising, hey, this is an amazing place. You know, you can go in there and it's free, and it's warm in the winter, and you can take these books home. And you know, it's like, for me, this was an amazing thing. You know, coming from in a working class area, and so I read a lot because it just seemed like this was a great thing to do. And I think that helped a lot when I came to do the 11 plus and go to the grammar school. Going to the grammar school was strange because it was a boys' grammar that had kind of elitist pretensions, and I found it strange to be in an environment with middle class kids, boys. So the language was different, the social norms were different, and so suddenly I was like being in a foreign country, and I think that was interesting, and I think it helped in later life because having worked in organisations and done lots of different things, it helped me to this notion of, well, how do you understand the culture? I mean, I didn't know I was doing that, but what I was doing was learning about a culture, a way of the way people behaved and the social norms. And of course we know from research that working class kids are disadvantaged. Not just from the work of Bernstein, but social anthropologists who've since then done work, you know, where they've actually been in working class families and realising that the language and the way of people relating to each other didn't fit a middle class school. So that's one of the reasons why working class kids, of course, do worse, and that's not got any better. As we know, white working class boys are the most underprivileged in our society, and of course teachers and educationists don't study that. Social anthropologists study it because they actually spend time in the families and understand why you have that gap. And so for me initially it was a struggle to deal with that, and I think the school thought, because I was this oik from the council estate, that I wouldn't do well. I mean, in fact, I got into the top form after the first form because they were streamed after the first form. And the teacher sort of, I can't remember what he said, but it was basically, oh, you won't last in the top form, So I did find school always odd, because I tend to agree with Oscar Wilde. I love to learn, I just can't bear to be taught. So my favourite teacher was the geography teacher because he never taught us anything. He just gave us the books and said, on a Monday learn this stuff and I'll test you on a Friday. And I thought it was great, I'd always liked geography anyway. I sort of liked, sense of spatial awareness and that whole way in which you could, like I would map the neighbourhood. As a kid, I would kind of go on my bike and sort of map the neighbourhood and compare it with maps, and so I'd always got that interest. So I found that I could make the system work for me. Though again, I think I picked the wrong subjects to do because the choice was modern languages, classics, or science, and I couldn't see the point in classics. And a lot of the messages, I think, from home were, of course, about doing something practical, being able to get a job, and so I couldn't see the point of classics or modern languages in terms of getting a job, because getting a job, you know, for me meant, you know, we're in Manchester, so what are the kind of jobs that exist in Manchester? And you don't need classics or modern languages to go to work for someone like ICI if you want to do, you know, chemistry. So it ended up with doing sciences, even though it probably wasn't the right choice. And just strange things where when I went to university, I've ended up writing a lot. Running a newspaper in part with, well, I wasn't the editor, but I used to write a lot. But at school it was always this notion I wasn't good at English, you know, and yet actually when I look back on it, I got probably the best mark in the school in O-level English. You know, but the teachers never rated the way I wrote, because I wrote the way I wanted to write, and it didn't fit again. So I was underestimated that, I suppose. And now I write, and I don't find it difficult to write. But I'd always kind of had a self-image of okay, science was okay because that's kind of practical, and you don't have to write a lot, and you could do practical stuff. So I ended up going to university, where I think was the wrong choice of a course. I probably should have done something in the social sciences, but I didn't know there was something called the social sciences. I mean, I didn't know that you could do things like psychology and sociology and things. So actually after leaping ahead, when I went to work, then I kind of got an idea about these things, and so my master's degree was in occupational psychology at Birkbeck. And that was sort of a start of thinking, oh, there actually are these things out there that are actually quite interesting and useful. Having sort of struggled through chemistry, because I was involved with the Students' Union, and that was where I learnt more, in a sense, that have been used to me now. Not much from my degree that has been any use to me. And that was true of all the friends that I made, that they're still friends. More than 50 years later, we're still friends. Because we were all the ones who didn't fit, and we ran the union, and we all got pretty lousy degrees. I mean, I did the best. I got a 2-2. So, but my friend who's won awards for investigative journalism, writes books, kind of famous in the journalistic world. I mean, he got a third. My friend who did rubber technology even failed a diploma in rubber technology, let alone a degree. And yet, you know, he's a very wealthy guy who has achieved a lot in his life. Set up a publishing company, has a property company, does, you know, and enjoys life. So, you know, we were part of that kind of group that didn't fit again in university life. So it was more getting involved with the union, and then becoming an executive member of the National Students, and then becoming full-time National Secretary in 1968. So that was a kind of interesting time. And thinking about the impact on what I thought later, or thought now, about education was, of course, my interest in being involved with National Students was about education and welfare. So I ran the education and welfare side of the union as National Secretary. The President was a kind of political leader. And I wasn't really interested in that. What I was interested in was stuff about learning, about, you know, so I was involved with report on exams, which were critical about exams, and we got quite a lot of press coverage of that, or student accommodation, and we did a lot of work on that. Safety. There were no safety requirements in college and university laboratories doing science, you know, so worked with one of the unions, teaching unions, to campaign on changing the law, you know, so that there were actually some controls on academic sort of letting you loose with dangerous stuff. And we got evidence of people being killed in university laboratories, but there's no comeback at the time because there was no law. So that's what interested me more. And then the other side was about learning, so exams, report, stuff around learning, and that influenced. So as well as my school experience, the experience of being National Students, and at the end of the 60s, when there was a lot of stuff about what is university education about, and suddenly students taking an interest in that, and that was an important period. Yeah, I started a postgrad doing a PhD, and that was when I got elected to the Executive National Union of Students, because I was a postgrad student. And I gave that up because it didn't seem a lot of point in what I was doing, and what I enjoyed most was being in the lab doing my 6 hours a week that I had to do teaching duties, and I thought, well, this is actually more interesting. So then I don't know how I got the job in a way, because I just applied and I just thought, yeah, I can't do this boring research anymore, because it's, you know, it's just for the benefit of my supervisor to publish things that don't seem at all relevant to humanity. So I applied for a post for education college, City of Westminster College, and got it. And so I was teaching chemistry and physics, but I thought, I'm not going to teach. So what I did was to do off the material. In those days, we didn't even have photocopiers. It was called bander machines, that you actually had to write on a sheet and then put it through a machine and turn a handle. And so I was like, how do I stop lecturing? Because that just seemed like a pointless activity. Let me give the stuff to the students and let's talk about things, you know. So why write on the board and get people to copy it? It just seemed silly to me. So that's what I did. So when I left the National Union of Students in 1970, I was actually offered a Dean of Students post in one of the polytechnics, and I was very keen on that whole idea of the polytechnics and a more practical approach to higher education. But I turned it down and went into a training job in local government, which I had for 2 years, which I really enjoyed, you know, because it was an opportunity again to think differently about learning, because we wouldn't do a lecture-based program. It'd be a lot of simulations and role plays, and of course, and again, one of the interesting things, we used to run 1-week residential programs for middle and senior managers in local government. This was working across all the 32 London boroughs. We were a kind of central unit that ran programs for managers. And one of the things that people would put on evaluations of a residential program was the value of the conversations in the bar, you know, and they were saying, well, I learned more often by talking with other people. So again, I started to say, well, why can't we just turn it around then? You know, why don't we just have people coming so they can talk to each other, and then you add on some subject stuff if they need it. But you know, if they're saying that's the most value, why don't we do more of that? You know, and then I discovered action learning, and I actually discovered that there was a guy called Roger Evans who'd been actually talking about that kind of stuff for some time, but nobody really paid much notice.
What was his name? Sorry.
Roger Evans.
Right.
He actually had a chair at Manchester University. He had this idea that you put managers together and they get them to talk about things, and then they can solve real problems and then do stuff. And he called it action learning. So I'd already started to think about that idea, so that in 1972 I'd been working with North East London Polytechnic, because the director there was actually a person I liked. When I was at National Union of Students, he was the only head of an institution who came to see me in my office at NUS to get advice about what to do. And he had a sit-in and he didn't know what to do. Whereas normally, you know, I'd be going to sit-ins and talking to a vice chancellor saying, look, you know, if you want to solve this, this is what you need to do, you know, because it's just daft and you and the students need to talk to each other, etc. But so my norm was of going to a university, there would be a sit-in and you're trying to get some kind of resolution of this. And here was somebody who'd got a sit-in, came to me in my office, sat across the desk from me, sort of saying, you know, I've got this sit-in, I don't know what to do about it. You know, there's these bloody Trotskyist students who have decided to you know, call a strike and a sit-in, and you know, and what do? You know? And so we talked about it, and I thought, well, he's a guy that I could work for because he's prepared to learn. And most of the university leaders that you meet weren't prepared to learn. You try to explain to them about what was going on, and so they were interested in doing their research and teaching and running institutions, but not actually good learners, most of the vice chancellors. So I went to work at North East London Polytechnic and then got involved in setting up the School for Independent Study. So what we did was to create an undergraduate programme whereby there were no entry requirements, people could do what they like, and they get a diploma of higher education after 2 years and then another year to do a degree. And so there's no syllabus, no entry requirements. So we started work on that in 1972, launched in 73 with 72 students, and there were 72 different courses because there was and we got no entry requirements, no curriculum, and it sort of worked for those people who could cope with it, but there were elements of it that didn't work so well. But with a degree, because that was the measure in a way of comparing it with the rest of the institution, we got about the same dropout rate as the rest of the Polytechnic for degree programmes, but we had a higher percentage of firsts, which did seem to say something, because we were taking, we had people who'd just come out of prison. I remember working with a girl who'd just come out of a mental hospital, and they only let her out because she was coming on this programme. I can remember a local black girl who'd had hardly any education, and she came, and suddenly, she had this amazing talent in maths, and she did a whole lot of interesting stuff on decision theory. And I remember the assessment board, the two internal assessors, had given her a 2-1, and of course we have an external examiner, so we had the professor of maths from the university there, who was outraged. He said, the work this girl's done is a PhD level. How dare you give her a 2-1? She has to have a first, and I want to take her on to doctorate. So we had examples like that, and this is someone who wouldn't have got, no way could she get on a normal degree programme because she didn't have maths at O level, let alone A level. So there'd be lots of stories like that, but there were also those who found it more difficult to just come into an environment where they could just do what they liked, sort of thing. I mean, they had to come up with a plan before they could do things. So that's where in so much learning, where we had this idea of learning contracts or learning agreements, that was something that was central to the School for Independent Study. Students had to come up with a plan, some goals, and they had to have that approved before they could then set off. So then they went in a way that they'd worked out what they wanted to learn, that had to be okayed, and then they could go away and do it, and then if they delivered on it, they could get initially the diploma of education, and then they could go on another year to do a degree. So the system worked quite well, but what was missing was some of that support, and what the students asked for a lot of the time was they needed more support, and the academics interpreted that as more control. So they instituted controls, which is the opposite of what people wanted, and this is this confusion about support and control. So at the same time, I then started to get involved with action learning programs, and I worked with GEC, which is at that time was the major British corporation in the engineering sector, and Sir Arnold Weinstock was probably the most feted chief executive. I mean, he would be each year become top of who's the most important, best chief executive, best leader of an organisation, and it would be Arnold Weinstock. And of course, part of the reason that he got that reputation was because he was again open to learning. So he was ill, I think, one time, and he saw a TV programme with Reg Evans talking about we can stop all this nonsense with lecturing and things, just get some managers together, get them to solve real problems, they'll learn, they'll become more effective. So So Ian instituted that, and I got to work on that programme. And so they were called learning sets, and you had 5 or 6 managers, no curriculum. They just would come together and work on on projects and he was interested in creating people who could run businesses. I think he had about 185 companies in GEC. So he needed people to run those businesses, and he was saying, I'm short of them. And so this notion of this programme was preparing people to actually, from second tier jobs, to move into the top tier, to become managing director of a business that would be part of GEC. And it worked really well. But what was a downside was that often they would do interesting projects, but still, when they went into a real job, there was still a notion of, well, but I didn't learn all the things I needed for this, so I've learned maybe to be entrepreneurial and do projects. But when you're chief executive, it's actually not doing a project. It's institutional leadership rather than project leadership, and they're 2 different things. So I just kind of thought, well, let's put 2 things together. The notion of having 5 or 6 people, working together and supporting each other seems a good thing. In independent study, we had the learning contract, learning agreement. We put the 2 together. So then I just started to run what we now call learning groups in the School for Independent Study. So instead of people working on projects and various things, I said, well, we'll get 6 people together and they can talk about what they're trying to learn and help each other and be mutually supportive. And it solves the problem of the lack of support in independent study, and it doesn't introduce control, because in the group people can talk about what they like in any way they like, as long as they have some mutual respect for each other. They have freedom to talk about anything they want. And then starting to introduce it into organisations was saying, well, instead of just the action learning stuff where it's a bit of a free-for-all and people do interesting projects, but they don't necessarily learn the things that are important to them in their life. So let's add doing the 5 questions which we developed in the School for Independent Study.